everybody, Miss Johnson here. Thank you for coming back to my YouTube channel. I would like to continue on by doing some read alouds, some different kinds of read alouds. So I did a picture book that was all about Gerald the giraffe and using the power of yet, and now I would like to do more of a fun story that I can post chapter by chapter, and you can follow along and learn from there. I like the story that I chose really kind of connects to us in a bunch of ways, and I'm gonna let you know what it is. It's called The Series of Unfortunate Events. Okay, so the read aloud that I have chosen to do on this YouTube channel is this book right here. It's called A Series of Unfortunate Events. First book by Lemony Snicket. It is titled The Bad Beginning. So this is such a fun series that I really hope to get you all hooked into by doing the first book. So the series is interesting because it's just all about bad things happening in the world. And I think we have a couple of connections to what's going on right now. So it's just a series of unfortunate events, and it is the bad beginning. I'm going to read the back to you because I think the back kind of just really demonstrates what the story is about. It really piques the reader's interest. Piques my interest. So I really hope that you enjoy it. Please let me know if you do. So here we go. It says, "Dear reader, I'm sorry to say that the book you are holding in your hands is extremely unpleasant. It tells an unhappy tale of three very unlucky children. Even though they are charming and clever, the Baudelaire siblings lead lives filled with misery and woe. From the very first page of this book, when the children are at the beach and receive terrible news, continuing on through the entire story, disaster lurks on their heels. One might say that they are magnets for misfortune. In this short book alone, the three youngsters encounter a greedy and repulsive villain, itchy clothing, a disastrous fire, a plot to steal their fortune, and cold porridge for breakfast. It is my sad duty to write these unpleasant tales, but there is nothing stopping you from putting this book down at once and reading something happy, if you prefer that sort of thing. With all due respect, Lemony Snicket." So that right there really piques my interest. I think it's fun. The author seems to be very involved. If I were doing kind of a book analysis of it, he is a third-person author, but he's very involved in the story, something that we don't typically see in like a typical Harry Potter story where it's just a narrator telling. He puts his opinions in there. He puts his kind of viewpoints, and I think that's going to be really interesting for us to study. Another thing about this book is when you open it up, there is kind of the opening, and then there's something that just, it piques my interest every time, and I get so excited to read it. So it says right here, so it says, "To Beatrice, darling, dearest, dead." Already right there, I'm so curious. Typically when you open a book and look at this is kind of the dedication that they give. Graphic feature is called the dedication, and the dedication is to this person, Beatrice, who is dead. I don't know who this person is, but I'm just so curious about it. So I would love to read the first chapter of this story. There's not pictures in this story. This is just kind of the next page after the title sequence. Chapter 1. If you're interested in stories with happy endings, you better off be reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning, and very few things happen in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the three Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful and had pleasant facial features. But they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you about this, but that is how the story goes. Okay, that's the first page of the story, and I'm already so intrigued with what happens, right? The author is so dedicated to the story of the three children right now, and I just can't wait to see where the story goes. Their misfortune began one day at Briny Beach. The three Baudelaire children lived with their parents in an enormous mansion at the heart of the dirty and busy city, and occasionally their parents gave them permission to take a rickety trolley. The word rickety, you probably know, here means unsteady or likely to collapse. Alone to the seashore, where they would spend the day as a short sort of vacation as long as they were home for dinner. Okay, so I'm just going to stop you right here because this is the beginning of the story. I love what the author does here. So he's telling the story, and then he gets to the word rickety. And instead of just continuing on, he kind of comes out of the story and just kind of tells you like a brief description and then just goes right back into the story. Again, this author is just so much fun to read, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. This particular morning was a gray and cloudy, which didn't bother the Baudelaire youngsters one bit. When it was hot and sunny, Briny Beach was crowded with tourists, and it was impossible to find a good place to lay on one's blanket. On gray and cloudy days, the Baudelaires had the beach to themselves to do what they liked. Violet Baudelaire, the eldest, liked to skip rocks. Like most 14-year-olds, she was right-handed, so the rocks skipped further across the murky water when Violet used her right hand than when she used her left. As she skipped rocks, she was looking out into the horizon and thinking about an invention that she would want to build. Anyone who knew Violet would tell you that she was thinking hard because her long hair was tied up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes. Violet had a real knack for inventing and building strange devices, so her brain was often filled with images of pulleys, levers, and gears, and she never wanted to be distracted by something as trivial as her hair. This morning, she was thinking about how to construct a device that would retrieve a rock after she had skipped into the ocean. Klaus Baudelaire, the middle child and the only boy, liked to examine creatures in the tide pools. Klaus was a little older than 12 and wore glasses, which made him look intelligent. He was intelligent. The Baudelaire parents had an enormous library in their mansion, a room filled with thousands of books on nearly every subject. Being only 12, Klaus, of course, had not read all the books in the Baudelaire library, but he had read a great many of them and had retained a lot of information from his readings. He knew how to tell an alligator from a crocodile. He knew he liked Julius Caesar, and he knew about the tiny, slimy animals found in Briny Beach, which he was examining now. Sunny Baudelaire, the youngest, liked to bite things. She was an infant and very small for her age, scarcely larger than a boot. What she lacked in size, however, she made for it in the size and sharpness of her 4 teeth. Sunny was at an age where you mostly speaks in a series of unintelligible shrieks, except when she uses a few actual words in her vocabulary, like bottle, mommy, and bite. Most people had trouble understanding what it was that Sunny was saying. For instance, this morning she was saying "gawk" over and over, which probably meant, look at that mysterious figure emerging from the fog. Sure enough, in the distance, along the misty shore of Briny Beach, there could be seen a tall figure striding toward the Baudelaire children. Sunny had already been staring and shrieking at the figure for some time when Klaus looked up from the spiny crab he was examining and saw it too. He reached over and touched Violet's arm, bringing her out of her inventing thoughts. Look at that, Klaus said, and pointed toward the figure. It was drawing closer, and the children could see a few details. It was about the size of an adult, except its head was tall and rather square. What do you think it is? Violet asked. I don't know, Klaus said, squinting at it, but it seemed to be moving right toward us. We're alone on the beach, Violet said, a little nervous. There's nobody else that would be moving toward. She felt the slender, smooth stone of her left hand, where she had been about to try and skip it as far as she could. She had a sudden thought to throw it at the figure, because it seemed so frightening. It only seemed scary, said Klaus, as if reading her sister's thoughts, because of all the mist. This was true. As the figure reached them, the children saw with relief that it was not anybody frightening at all, but somebody they knew, Mr. Poe. Mr. Poe was a friend, and Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire, Mr. Poe was a friend of Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire's, whom the children had met many times at dinner parties. One of the things Violet, Klaus, and Sunny really liked about their parents was they didn't send their children away when they had company over, but allowed them to join the adults at the dinner table and participate in the conversation as long as they helped clear the table. The children remembered Mr. Poe because he always had a cold and was constantly excusing himself from the table to have a coughing fit in the next room. Mr. Poe took off his top hat, which had made his head look large and square in the fog, and stood for a moment, coughing loudly into a white handkerchief. Violet and Klaus moved forward to take his hand and say, "How do you do?" "How do you do?" said Violet. "How do you do?" said Klaus. "Oh, da yow," said Sunny. "Fine, thank you," said Mr. Poe, but he seemed very sad. For a few seconds, nobody said anything, and the children wondered what he was doing there at Briny Beach, when he should have been at the bank in the city where he worked. He was not dressed for the beach. "It's a nice day," Violet said. Finally, making conversation. Sunny made a noise that sounded like an angry bird, and Klaus picked her up and held her. "It was a very nice day," Mr. Poe said absent-mindedly, staring into the empty beach. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you children." The three Baudelaire siblings looked at him, and Violet, with some embarrassment, felt the stone in her hand and was glad that she had not thrown it at Mr. Poe. "Your parents," said Mr. Poe, "have perished in a terrible fire." The children didn't say anything. "They perished," Mr. Poe said, "in a fire that destroyed the entire house. I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, my dears." Violet took her eyes off Mr. Poe, stared out into the ocean. Mr. Poe never called the Baudelaire children "my dears" before. She understood the words he was saying, but thought he must be joking, playing a terrible joke on her and her brother and sister. "Perish," said Mr. Poe, "means killed." "We know what the word perish means," Klaus said crossly. He did know what the word perish meant, but he was still having trouble understanding exactly what it was that Mr. Poe had said. It seemed to him that Mr. Poe must somehow have misspoken. "The fire department arrived, of course," Mr. Poe said, "but they were too late. The entire house was engulfed in fire. It burned to the ground." Klaus pictured the books in the library going up in flames. Now he'd never read all of them. Mr. Poe coughed several times in his handkerchief before continuing. "I was sent to retrieve you here and to take you home, where you'll stay for some time while we figure things out. I am the executor of your parents' estate. This means I will be handing their enormous fortune and figuring out where you children will go. When Violet comes of age, the fortune will be yours, but the bank will take charge of it until you are old enough." Although he said that he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Poe was the Although he had said he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Poe was saying he was the executioner. He had simply walked down the beach and told them something that had changed their lives forever. "Come with me," Mr. Poe said, and held out his hand. In order to take it, Violet had to drop the stone she was holding. Klaus took Violet's other hand, and Sunny took Klaus's other hand, and in that manner, the three Baudelaire children, the Baudelaire orphans, now were led down the beach and from their previous lives. Alright, so that's the end of chapter 1 right there. Already we've established 3 really important key characters. If I go back to the back of the book, it's talking about the 3 Baudelaire children and how their lives are changed. So now we're going to kind of figure out what happens after that. Where do they go from there? So thank you so much for tuning in. I had a really great time reading it too. I hope you did too. Please let me know. And I will do chapter 2 next. See you soon. Thank you. Bye.